This is a Forbidden Knowledge News premium episode. To get access to this full episode and many more, visit forbiddenknowledgenews.online/packages or just click the link in the description now. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome John Barbour. He is an actor, comedian, television host, and is the only performer in TV to win Emmys for both entertainment and news shows. He is known as one of the hosts of the NBC reality TV series Real People, for which he was also a creator and co-producer. He has made 2 documentaries about the assassination of JFK, the JFK assassination, the Garrison tapes, and the American media and the second assassination of John F. Kennedy. John, welcome. How are you tonight?
Chris, I can't tell you how delighted I am to be on your show for a number of reasons. First of all, I love listening to your show. I love the title of the show, Forbidden Knowledge. And also, I love the name Chris because that's my son's name. I have one son. His name is Christopher. And I'm absolutely stunned by the fact that now I've listened to you. You have the voice of an older person. The content of your show is for people who are a lot older than you are. How on earth did somebody like you, who wasn't even born when John Kennedy was killed, how did you get involved with doing what it is that you're doing?
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. I've always been just interested in topics like this, just the unknown, because I've always felt that we've been lied to. There's been information extremely important information that we haven't been told about our history, about things going on right now. And I felt compelled to share the information and get people that were smarter than myself to talk about it on my show. And it just went from there and turned out to be the greatest move I ever made.
Well, thankfully you did that because you're a delight to listen to, an informing delight to listen to. As the world has turned, it looks like one of the biggest liars in American history was one of America's greatest heroes at one time, and that was Abraham Lincoln, who said government of the people and by the people and for the people, which it certainly has not. It's become government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. And what we are seeing now, it may be government of Trump, by Trump, and for Trump. So there you go. And then the other big lie is I am so appalled at everybody on mainstream media talking about we are a country of laws. We're going through this as we listen to Amy Barrett being grilled to become the next Supreme Court justice. And the thing that sort of surprises me about Amy Barrett is everybody knows she's a hyper-Christian, which certainly she is allowed to be. She belongs to some kind of cult where she calls herself a handmaiden. And it's hard to believe that she could literally separate church from state. And the truth is, if Donald Trump, knowing her background, she's a terrific mother with 7 kids, and knowing her background, if Donald Trump were not the president of the United States, this guy who was an open adulterer, brags happily about grabbing pussy, she would have nothing to do with him. And yet she is sitting there waiting to be confirmed, and she'll probably be confirmed. So there you have three conservatives being confirmed. And one of the most disturbing to me, a lot of people don't know this, since you mentioned, and I mentioned John Kennedy. It's in And sadly, this portion of it is not in the American media, and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But have you ever heard of a guy named Robert Morley? He was 6 years ago one of the leading researchers into the assassination. He sued the CIA. Now, because of the power of Oliver Stone's excellent film, JFK, the JFK Records Assassinations Act was passed. And last October, all the files were to be released according to congressional mandate. And Donald Trump caved into the CIA. But this fellow, 5 years ago, sued the CIA, but not for the CIA's files on the John Kennedy murder. He wanted Jim Garrison's files. Chris, what a lot of people don't know is that the files from the Warren Commission will be released in the year 2039. But Jim Garrison's files will not be released till 25 years after that. And the reason for that is Garrison not only solved the case, he named names. So Jefferson Morley took this all the way through the courts for 5 years, and last year ended up before a judge in Washington, D.C. It was his final hearing. And he said he does not want the CIA files. He wants Jim Garrison's files, which do not belong to the U.S. government. They belong to the state of Louisiana. And the judge who ruled in favor of the CIA not releasing the files was, guess who that was?
Who was that?
Brett Kavanaugh.
Oh, wow.
So Brett Kavanaugh becomes another asset for Donald Trump to appoint to the Supreme Court. So,
yeah, I do want to get to some of the things that are happening today, especially with the election coming up. But I would like to talk a lot about the assassination of JFK, the Garrison files. It's one of those events in modern history that, of course, changed the course of politics, the media, so many aspects of society and our conspiracy culture now. And when you look at the amount of disinformation and lies surrounding this, it gets extremely difficult for your everyday person to understand the scope of what has happened and what actually continues to happen to this day when it comes to psychological warfare operations, assassinations, massive drug operations, and even staged events.
It is the touchstone for everything. And the only president ever to hold office to say that was Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter said when he was president, we will never get America back to where it was until we solve the John Kennedy murder.
Right.
And he tried to appoint Ed Sorensen to the head of the CIA to open the files. But of course, he was defeated and they appointed a Navy veteran to become head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And there was an assassination attempt on Jimmy Carter in Los Angeles by two Mexicans, or two guys with Hispanic names, and one of them was named Oswaldo. And Jimmy Carter said, I have lost control of the government. The John Kennedy murder was solved by Jim Garrison. It is a cold case in the Justice Department. All they have to do is open that cold case and it unravels absolutely everything, Chris, that has gone wrong with this country. The murder of Martin Luther King by the CIA, mostly by the FBI, because his name was codenamed Zorro, and J. Edgar Hoover said he was the most dangerous man in the world, and they participated in his murder. And by the way, he was not killed by a gunshot wound to the chin. People don't usually die from a gunshot wound to the chin. If you read an excellent book called The Plot to Kill the King by his attorney, William Pepper, you will find that he was smothered in the hospital when they took him to the hospital by Secret Service agents. So there's a lot more. And then with Robert Kennedy, in our movie, we have the autopsy report, because became very close friends with Thomas Noguchi. I and his lawyer set up a committee in Los Angeles to retain him as an independent coroner. He's the one that performed the autopsy on Marilyn Monroe. and of course on Robert Kennedy. And in the film, you see his autopsy report says that the shot that killed Bobby Kennedy was fired from 2.5 inches from the rear of his head because of the extensive powder burns on the skull and on the skin. Sirhan was 6 feet in front and firing blanks. And guess why he was firing blanks, Chris?
Why is that?
Because the 2 real assassins, including Payne Cesar, who shot and killed Bobby Kennedy and then moved to the Philippines, if Sirhan had been firing 22 bullets, he might have killed the 2 real assassins. So, and that was one of the things that, you know, when they set up the House Select Committee on Assassinations, there were a lot of researchers that wanted the murder of Robert Kennedy included because they had the autopsy report that could prove that Sirhan didn't do it. The government turned it down because they wanted to stand with the fiction that you had a lone assassin for these 3 people when they were all government operations. And that's why I laugh when I hear all these people talking about, well, we're a land of law and order. That is a bunch of nonsense, because when Jim Garrison arrested Clay Shaw, he subpoenaed Helms, he subpoenaed people at the FBI, at the CIA. They all tore up his subpoenas, all legal subpoenas.
Now, before we get too far into this, I'd like to know really what got you started looking into this, and how did you actually make contact with Garrison?
By accident. Chris, I must tell you, I have led the most amazing accidental life, because all of the things, I mean, I came from a severely dysfunctional home. I was born at the Salvation Army Charity Ward in Toronto. And my father fought so much and hated my mother so much, who was a drunken alcoholic and a nymphomaniac, that he would join the Canadian Army to go overseas and fight the Germans. And my mother brought uncles into my house like they were grapes. They came in bunches. So I was on the street when I was 6, and when I was 17, I came to the United States to be a professional gambler. And what happened in my life, I become the accidental writer for Frank Sinatra, the most powerful entertainer in the world, for 4.5 years. I create the most watched and most original television show in history, which is Real People. And then I get to do the 2 definitive documentaries on the murder of John Kennedy and the birth and purpose of fake news. All of these magnificent things happen to me. Even the meeting of my wife and having my son all happened by accident. But Chris, the disasters that happened to me were those things that I planned well. So I'm a non-believer. I do believe in divine intervention, and I don't know why, because I have had divine intervention in my life. So the accidental meeting with Jim Garrison. I had been a comic, very successful comic. And the reason I became a comic is because, have you ever heard of somebody named Jack Parr?
Yes, of course.
Oh, good. At 40, you've heard of Jack Parr? Well, good for you. He was by far the greatest late night talk show host in television history, better than all of them combined, all of them. And he opened his show with a monologue. And I was so impressed when I saw these wonderful conversations that he had with people. I didn't know people talked to one another. I thought they screamed at one another, they punched one another. I thought, God, a guy can make a living doing that. So that's what I wanted to do. But in order to do it, he did a monologue. So I said, I'm going to do a monologue, and I became successful. And I was in a club with Steve Martin called the Ice House in Pasadena, working out material. And this fellow came in Los Angeles, when John Kennedy was alive, because this is very important. There were 1,500 different owners of television stations and radio stations in this country. Because of Bill Clinton, the worst president in American history, signing the Communications Act, it put 96% of all our media in the hands of 6 monopoly corporations. Trump calls it fake news, but he could get rid of it with his pen in a minute. by just reversing the Communications Act, but he doesn't do it because he needs fake news, which we can get to. But back to the business of 1963, 1,500 different owners. At the time that I got AM Los Angeles, which became the most successful morning news show in the country, again, I got that thing by accident. They were being challenged. You could challenge a license of any station in America for cause. And in Los Angeles, there were 20,000 Chicanos marching on City Hall and on KABC Channel 7 because they didn't have representation in City Hall, and they certainly didn't have it on KABC, and they were challenging the license. So what KABC did is they dropped the morning movies that they were doing and their cartoon shows and decided to do a news show and had an open audition. And the fellow there was a fella, a very, very prominent Chicano in Los Angeles who was a handsome guy, looked like Ricardo Montalban, spoke Spanish and Russian and Chinese, looked like he was a slam dunk to get this show. He saw me with Steve Martin at the Ice House. And when I was finished, he said to me, "Hey, John, why don't you go and audition for this show? I just auditioned to it. They're holding open auditions." And I said to him, I said, "Hey, hold it, you're already a Chicano. That's what they want. They're going to give you the job." And he said, "John, I got to tell you honestly, I can read great, but I can't ad lib. And you do a lot of political stuff in your act. So obviously you can ad lib and you could read. Here's the guy's name. The producer's name is Brad Lockman." He says, "Give him a call and go down and audition." So I did, and I got the job. And it was astonishing. And all of a sudden, and now let me tell you something, quite honestly, Chris, I never got into television looking for fame or looking for money. I got into television looking for me because I didn't know who I was, this orphan kid. And I thought, well, if I interview all these very famous people, maybe I'll learn some secret about how I can get my life organized. And of course, it was the height of the Vietnam War, so I put on people that people hated. I put Jane Fonda on when everyone wanted Hanoi Jane lynched. And then I gave Muhammad Ali an hour. Now, he is revered as a god now, but in 1970, 95% of every American wanted him either in jail or in a coffin for being a traitor to Lyndon Johnson by saying, "I'm not going to kill yellow people in Asia when white people are my problem here." I gave him an hour. So, and there was a thing called the Fairness Doctrine. So I could not tell these people that I agreed with their point of view. I had to be very tough and act as a devil's advocate. So anyway, at that time, Jim Garrison had just lost the Clay Shaw trial. Clay Shaw was put on trial January 29th, 1969, the birthday of my son, Serendipity. And so the news came out that he had lost the case and he was an egomaniac looking to become governor of Louisiana, et cetera, et cetera. And I believed it. I had no reason to doubt the new country that I want to become a citizen of. So I'm at a bookstore one day. It's called the Larry Edmonds Used Bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard across from Musso and Frank, 100-year-old restaurant. And I see this book called Heritage of Stone. And the author's name was Jim Garrison. And I thought, is this the same guy? So I picked it up and opened it. I was there for 4 hours reading the entire book. And the next day I phoned him. Would you like to know what happened during the phone call?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Again, this is all by accident, and I am no believer in conspiracies. I'm just a storyteller, and I love telling stories. So that's what we did so successfully on the morning show. We found the most interesting people we could, and they would come on and tell their amazing stories. But there's no story more interesting than the guy that's investigating the murder of John Kennedy, the president of the United States. So I look it up and I call information. They give me his number. I dial it. I'm expecting a secretary to answer. Instead, it's a guy with a beautiful, deep bass baritone voice. And I said, could I speak to Mr. Garrison, please? And they said, this is he. He even spoke perfect English. And I said, Mr. Garrison, my name is John Barbour, and I have this morning show here in Los Angeles, and I just finished reading Heritage of Stone. And he interrupted me, Chris. And he said, oh, you must be the other one. I only sold 2 copies, which is not true, but it gives you an idea of his sense of sardonic humor. So I said, I wanted to book him on the show. And he said, you'll never get away with it. I finally convinced him that he should come on because we would be live. And I would interview him for 45 minutes, and then we would have people call in for 45 minutes. And the callers were often more interesting than I was. They would ask great questions. And he was enamored of that, and he agreed to do it. We had a half-hour conversation after that. And in essence, this is what he said. He said, John, it is 1970. It's 6 years after the publishing of the Warren Report, something I never doubted because I was with the FBI, I was in the military, I was at Dachau when they freed that death camp from the Germans. He said, I believed in authority and I believed my government. He said, but you know, the Harris poll just came out and they say 83% of all Americans do not believe the Warren Report or that Oswald could have acted alone. And I said to him, I said, well, Mr. Garrison, if there's so many people like that, why aren't they flooding the Justice Department and storming the barricades of Bunkum in Washington? And he chuckled and he said, well, you didn't hear about the second question. And I said, what's the second question? And he said, the second question is a lot tougher. Harris poll said, would you like to see a second, deeper investigation in which the heads of the Central Intelligence Agency and J. Edgar Hoover are put under oath and questioned about the murder? And I gasped. I said, oh, wow. And he said, guess how many people wanted to see that? And I said, how many? He said, only 21%. Then he said to me, Chris, John, what does that say to us about Americans as sheep? I don't know where this came from, Chris, but I blurted out, Mr. Garrison, what it says to me is this. I know what my mother and father did in the rumble seat of the car. We used to have rumble seats in those days, or on the pool table, or on the floor, or in the bedroom to conceive me. But don't ever tell me my mother is not a virgin. Well, he howled. He said, you know, that sounds exactly like my favorite American writer, Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. And John, we have been fooled since November 22nd, 1963. So I booked him, and he was thrilled to come on the show. I was canceled the next day, and he was canceled the next day. Now, Chris, I never thought it had anything to do with me trying to book Garrison. Even though he warned me I'd never get away with it, I thought I'm in show business. You work for a week if you're a comic, or you work for 13 weeks if you have a television show. And that was it. For the next 10 years, I only talked to him twice. Once was during Vietnam. We got on the phone and started talking about Vietnam. But the second time was over Watergate. I was, as Frank Sinatra's private writer, he knew that I had this long feud with Johnny Carson. Long feud. And in order to get even with Carson, because he wasn't fond of Carson either, he booked me on the show when he hosted The Tonight Show, which you can see on my site. And I had a throwaway line setting up a joke. And the joke that I was setting up was that in order to get laughs these days in television, comedians don't have to write jokes about politicians. All they have to do is quote them. And the lead up to that was talking about Watergate may be something to put America on the brink of democracy. That was a straight line and it got huge applause. So Jim called me the next day and asked if he could use it. And when we were talking about Watergate, he mentioned a lot of names that were involved with the John Kennedy assassination. And then I didn't get to talk to him and try to tell his story on television until September 5th, 1981, when I interviewed him for 3 hours in his home. Most thrilling 3 hours I ever spent in my entire life. Frightening and inspiring at the same time.
Wow, I can't imagine. That is amazing. Now, when it comes to the assassination, I know you're probably asked this all the time, but in your opinion, what were the reasons? Because I know there's more than one that they took him out.
Well, the main reason, according to Jim Garrison, and let me tell you something first about Mr. Garrison and his case. When he arrested Clay Shaw, in his house, they found all kinds of homosexual pornographic material, a lot of devious stuff about his homosexual lifestyle. And Jim Garrison ordered his staff never to talk about it, not during the trial, and never tell the New Orleans Statesman, the newspaper, about it, because it had nothing to do with the assassination. He tried to protect Clay Shaw's rights in this manner. First of all, aside from charging him for conspiracy, his main case was the perjury case. He brought two charges against Clay Shaw: conspiracy and perjury. He took his case before a grand jury to make sure he was going to protect Shaw's rights and his case. The grand jury moved immediately for a trial. Again, to protect him, he recruited 3 of the most prominent judges in Louisiana to set up a panel and listen to his case. And to argue on the other side of the case was Shaw's attorney, a guy named Diamond, who appears in the film and admits this in the film. And Diamond is trying to argue with these 3 judges that Clay Shaw had nothing to do with the assassination and isn't even mentioned in the Warren Report. Well, these 3 judges read the 26 volumes of the Warren Report, and they say, this is not an investigation. This is all hearsay. This is totally inadmissible in any court of law. You never heard about that on CBS or NBC or ABC or Time or Life or you never heard it anywhere. Garrison was pummeled because he lost the conspiracy case. But in 8 minutes, the jury found Clay Shaw guilty of perjury, that he was lying. Now, how thorough was Garrison? The trouble in 1970 was trying to convince people that this distinguished real estate man and executive at Permindex was CIA. It was hard to believe in those days that Americans could be that vicious, and that secretive about all their assassinations and skullduggery. They're supposed to only operate in foreign countries, not in the United States, but their biggest move was in the United States when they created Operation Mockingbird, Project Mockingbird, to infiltrate and take over the media. And they had 400 paid assets in the 1970s writing and reporting all of our news so they could create the fake war of Vietnam. So anyway, the government moves in immediately knowing that Garrison will get a conviction of Shaw, and they kill that. Jim Garrison said to me, the murder was starting to be planned the day the Bay of Pigs failed, because he had been lied to about the fact that there would be an uprising in Cuba and they get rid of Castro. And as a result of that, he fired Allen Dulles and Cabell, his assistant, whose brother was mayor of Dallas. Okay, so he gets rid of them. Now I'm going to tell you a personal story about Jim Garrison. When he talked to me, he had declined to be interviewed by anyone for 10 years about the Clay Shaw trial. But when I had Real People, the #1 show in television, watched by half of every American television set that was on in this country, the highest rated show in the history of television, did more good for the country in getting laws passed in 3 years than 60 Minutes did in 33 years. That was the power of that show. So I'm doing that show, which I created, and I'm the storyteller of the show. That's why the show became successful. But in any event, I'm reading the LA Times one day, page 13. said the House Select Committee on Assassinations has concluded 4 shots had been fired. And the reason they concluded it is a motorcycle officer by the name of H.B. McLean had left his dicta belt open and it recorded all the shots. So in any event, they conclude that a conspiracy existed in the murder of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King and turned it over to the Justice Department. And nothing ever happened. It is still a closed case, cold case. Mr. Garrison, because of this, they tried to set him up, the FBI and the CIA, they trailed him and his 5 kids for years, hounded him. They tried to entrap him with sexual encounters and homosexuals and women. They did everything to try to destroy that man and his life. And of course, and he says they succeeded. Sadly, he says they succeeded. Well, the pressure was so much, his wife divorced him. And when she divorced Jim, she got an enormous settlement because his books were very successful. And of course, she was easy prey for some guy who's a gold digger. And she married a guy who was a gold digger and literally broke her. Okay, when I finally got around to making my first film, Jim Garrison was on his deathbed. And I had to deal with his daughter, Elizabeth, who became his spokesperson. Oliver Stone wanted to make a documentary. At the time, he was making JFK. He had bought On the Trail of the Assassins for $50,000. And the Garrison family was to get 10% of the proceeds or the net profits from the sale of the film, which they had to sue Oliver Stone and Warner Brothers for because they never got it. But that's just a little sidebar story. In any event, he's on his deathbed. And Oliver Stone is turned down by Elizabeth and calls me and said, my father only wants you to tell a story because you were the only one in 1970 and from there on who just was trying to tell his story, and it cost you a lot. So whatever we can do to help. So that's how we made the film. So in any event, he's on his deathbed. And his daughter tells me he died the day the first documentary, The Garrison Tapes, won the San Sebastian Film Festival award. I was on board a plane flying back from Spain. And it was nighttime, and the door to the pilot's cabin opened up. And the pilot himself actually walked down the aisle till he got to me, and he said, are you Mr. Barbour? And I said, yes. He says, we've got an important phone call. We never do this, but in your case, we'll do it. Your wife has been calling us and absolutely hounding us. Please tell my husband that Mr. Garrison died. So he said, John, I'm so sorry to have to tell you that. And he went back in. When I called Liz, he said, John, I'm going to tell you this story, and I'm not going to tell anybody else's story. This is what happened just before my father died. He called me and the other 4 kids and his best friend, who happened to be a minister. He said, get a marriage certificate, call my ex-wife, your mother, and get her down here because I'm going to marry her. And the daughter said, she won't come, she won't come. And he said, get her here, don't tell her why she's coming here, but get her over here. So the wife came over, and Jim said, I want to propose to you a second time. Isn't that sweet? He's on his deathbed. She said, well, it didn't work out the first time, Jim. It's not going to work out now because you don't look too good. And he said, well, you're lucky I don't look too good because it's going to benefit you. And she said, how? He said, because if you're my wife and I die, I have a substantial pension as a judge, and that pension will keep you alive. She married him, and that's what she lived on the rest of her life. That is the kind of man Jim Garrison was. I must tell you, there are 3 traits that I admire in people. They are intelligence, talent, and character. But Chris, character trumps them all. I do not see any of that evident in our 2 candidates for the presidency right now. Jim Garrison had it in spades. He is by far the most powerful, heroic American I have ever met. America's full of heroes. I mean, Audie Murphy in the Second World War, killing more Germans than anybody else. But he had people on his side. He had his government on his side, people with guns. Jim Garrison took on the entire establishment of the media and the government, just bearing the truth. And he was gunned down. Nobody comes close to Jim Garrison, except maybe Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson.
Right. Yeah. Extraordinary men. And I want to go back to my original question about the reasoning behind why they took him out.
Oh, I'm sorry about yes.
That's great. Right.
The planning started on the day of the Bay of Pigs, and I have confirmation from an intelligence officer that is really the day it started. So it was like 2.5 years in the making. But there were two other reasons. One other reason was that he wanted to put the Federal Reserve. Do you know what the Federal Reserve is? Obviously, I hear it a lot on your show. It is 6 families that own a private bank called brilliantly the Federal Reserve, because there's nothing federal about it. It's all private money. John Kennedy wanted to put them out of business, but didn't want to announce it. So what he did a year earlier in 1962, he signed Executive Order 11110. It called, as the Constitution calls for, a mandate for the Treasury Department to print our money. Now, in 1963, if you were to borrow $20,000 from a bank, you would have to pay back 23%, because most of it goes to the Federal Reserve. But with this, John Kennedy printed silver notes, redeemable in silver. And so in 1962 and early 63, if you were going to borrow $20,000 from your own treasury, you would only have to pay back 1.5%. There's only one bank there's a bank in North Dakota, the only bank like it in the country. And it's for the people. It's not a part of the Federal Reserve System. The minute John Kennedy was shot, shortly after, he was pronounced dead, I think, just at 105. And one of the things that Jim Garrison showed me was Dr. McClellan's death certificate. You can't find it anywhere. And then and so what happened when he was pronounced dead? They stopped printing these silver notes. Pictures of these silver notes and that executive order are in the film. Now we had this pandemic, and I was waiting, as a lot of people were, for Donald Trump to keep his promise about getting rid of the Federal Reserve, to opening up all the CIA files and giving us a free press, none of which has happened in the 3 years that he's been there. So when this COVID virus lockdown hit us, he has the Federal Reserve print off $3 trillion. And all that money goes to these 6 families. So I said, I have sent him 2 notes. I never get them answered, but I sent him a note. And I said, dear Mr. President, after you had the Federal Reserve print off these $3 trillion, could you please have them print off some toilet paper for me? So, I mean, it is a sham. Everything we see now is a reality, disgraceful sham. We become a cartoon reality show to the rest of the world. And it's truly, truly sad.
Yes, I'd have to definitely agree with you on that one. Now, when it comes to the players involved in the assassination, they have some researchers like Cory Hughes that believe that the Mossad had a very massive role to play in this. Would you agree with that?
Well, only to a small extent, because the truth is, I mean, I know that Cory believes that's the main thing, but it's not the main thing. It is true that John F. Kennedy tried to get AIPAC registered as foreign lobby, because indeed they are a foreign lobby. Now, if I were Jewish, I'd be in AIPAC as a foreign, as to protect and to say it will never happen again. The Holocaust will never happen again. I can understand that. But they legislate for Israel. They do not legislate for America. And at Dimona, they were creating atom bombs. And John Kennedy insisted that the United States get to inspect all their factories at Dimona. And of course, Ben-Gurion didn't want that to happen. So they became enemies of John Kennedy. And they were delighted when John Kennedy was murdered, as was AIPAC, because Lyndon Johnson and nobody else had tried to take them to court. But only the government can shut down an investigation. And the government is not run by AIPAC. I mean, there are 22 Israeli Americans in very prominent positions in our government that they're neocons who determined the foreign policy of our country that got Bush to lie us into Iraq. They're all war criminals, for crying out loud. People that lied us into Iraq are war criminals. And here you have Donald Trump talking about arresting Obama for some God unknown reason when he's got a war criminal as a Republican, for crying out loud. I mean, it's like it's out of Dr. Strangelove, how I learned to love the bomb. It's like watching Peter Sellers in the White House. I mean, it's like a Saturday Night Live, or better still, Monty Python and the search for the Holy Grail. So, but there are, and obviously the media is owned mostly by Jews, but there's nothing wrong with that. And Jews brag a lot about the fact that they created and built Hollywood, which indeed they did. I mean, these haberdashers from New York gave up, sewing and ironing and went to California and created the motion picture industry. But now, one of the leading Mossad agents is the guy that funded JFK, and he was an unknown Mossad agent when he produced Pretty Woman. Remember Pretty Woman? That really, really nice film produced by a Mossad agent. He's done a dozen really good movies, a really good producer, but he must be a better Mossad agent than he is producer, because now they are so strong, he openly brags about it.
Now, you have talked about that there are individuals that are still alive today that have been involved with this that could be arrested for these crimes. Could you tell us a little bit about who those are? This is a Forbidden Knowledge News premium episode. To get access to this full episode and many more, visit forbiddenknowledgenews.online/packages or just click the link in the description now.